My name is John H., and I'm an alcoholic. I'm also a drug addict and a compulsive gambler. In this Code Blue Big Book Study in Action seminar, we're going to go through the recovery section of the Big Book line by line, and we're going to do the action that our book tells us we must do to recover from the seemingly hopeless condition of mind and body. This is based on the Canadian method used by the Golden Slippers, but I also borrow a lot of information from the Joe and Charlie Big Book Weekend tapes, as I feel their interpretation carries so much depth and weight. Sometimes I use their material verbatim, so don't get angry at me. Sometimes they can say things a lot better than me. This action and study is designed so that you can follow along in a 4th edition Big Book. Have your pen and highlighter ready. I don't claim to be any kind of big book guru or top 10 spiritualist. I'm just a simple drunk who was almost dead from the disease when a group of my heroes, some recovered alcoholics, took me through the book 5 years ago and saved my life. There's also some paperwork that you can download. Hopefully I'll get that online as well. Some from Joe and Charlie and some from the Golden Slippers. Please forgive any mistakes, errors, or misquotes you may detect. I'm sure there are many, for once again, I'm just a simple drunk trying to help other folks as I was helped myself. Thanks for listening. Good evening. My name is John H. I'm an alcoholic. We start out every session by me reading a little couple of paragraphs, so I'm gonna start that right now. During the 1950s, a man by the name of Max C., now dead, started a group in Winnipeg, Manitoba called the Golden Slippers. The group was a back to the basics of the big book kind of group, especially for those people who could not stay sober for any length of time. The group took a bunch of chronic slippers and walked them through the steps, taking the action exactly as laid out by the first 100 men and women who wrote the basic textbook Alcoholics Anonymous. This is not your typical thanks for sharing kind of AA meeting, nor is it like any seminar. Participants are asked to do all 12 steps as laid out in our basic textbook. One or more of the people who've done this work before will be guides to lead you through the instructions in our basic textbook using a dictionary published at about the same time as the book Alcoholics Anonymous to help us better understand the directions as they were written by the first 100 men and women. We ask every participant to commit to the entire process. Though we read and study the AA Big Book, this group is not limited to members of AA. We who have participated in these groups before have come to understand that these sessions make us much better sponsors. We can now lead people through the steps unfettered and unchanged, exactly as given to us by those who have gone before. In addition to being a boot camp for sponsors, we also feel this is especially valuable to those who have been through some sort of treatment or rehab and have been, in effect, left off at step 3 or step 5. Recovery requires that we do all 12 steps. We recover in AA by taking the steps, and if we don't take the action as described in our basic textbook, we might not recover. The study and action sessions will guide you through the steps precisely as the first 100 men and women laid them down. These are back to the basic sessions, accepting the simple kit of spiritual tools that's been laid at our feet. Okay, guys, the next thing that we do is we open up our session with the set-aside prayer. So, if you're willing, it's up on the board there. And if you're listening to this, I ask everybody if you're willing to get down on your knees and to say the set-aside prayer. And it goes like this. God, please let me set aside everything I think I know about sobriety, life, and you, so that I may be open to a new experience. Amen. Okay, guys, normally I record this session and there's about 20 to 30 people listening, but as my recording device didn't work the first session, I'm doing this by myself out on my back porch on a Saturday afternoon, and believe you me, it's not as fun when you do these things by yourself. Now, what I'd like everybody to do, right, we do this at the beginning of every session of Code Blue. We put our sober date. Open up your Alcoholics Anonymous book, and I do like the 4th edition, and I like the big print, right? Because we like to write a lot of stuff and do a lot of highlighting and note-taking, etc. So open the front page and write your sober date at the top of that first page, right above where it says Alcoholics Anonymous, right? So write your sober date, and guys, I'm probably going to be going a little bit faster than I normally do in my Code Blue sessions because again, I'm by myself and it's not as fun. So being as you're listening to the tape, you can can rewind it, or listening online, you can go back if you miss something and I'm going too fast and re-listening to it. So put your sober date at the top of the book. Put your name and your phone number in the book as well, because if you forget your book at any AA meeting or anywhere else, you're going to want somebody to call you so you can get it back. I would be kind of bummed out if I lost my book, but because I got my name and phone number, I know that somebody's going to return it to me. Right under your sober date and your name and your phone number, I would like you to write alcoholism and triple underline the ism, not alcohol-wasm, right? And triple underline the wasm. Alcoholism, not alcohol-wasm. Now, right underneath the two words, Alcoholics Anonymous, we're going to write something. And this is something that I ask everybody who goes through Code Blue to do, and I ask everybody that I'm sponsoring to do this as well. So I want you to write the words, are you willing to go to any length for victory over alcohol? Right? Are you willing to go to any length for victory over alcohol? And guys, if it applies, you can go ahead and write and drugs, right? So are you, for me, of course, I had to do them both. Are you willing to go to any length for victory over alcohol and or drugs if it applies? And then I want you to sign it, and I want you to date it, right? I want you to date it. So right now, as you're listening to this, sign that statement and date it. Okay, and hopefully by writing your sober date up at the top of the book, you know, I had that up there, and there was a couple of times when I came pretty close to using, and I said, Dad, burn it, I'm not gonna change that date at the top of my book. So that's just, it's a good idea. Just leave it up there as is. So normally now at the session we would have introductions, and then we're going to go ahead and start reading the book. So one other thing, guys, that I want you to know, and you know, the whole idea behind this Code Blue session is that people come into Code Blue like me, you know, scared, pretty beat up, thinking that this thing isn't going to work, full of being self-centered, full of self-pity, angry, fearful, miserable, desperate, afraid. We take this session, right? It's 16 sessions, each lasting about an hour and a half. Now, normally, if you go through Code Blue, it's every Tuesday at 6:30. But if you're listening to these sessions, you can do them as fast as you can complete them, right? But hopefully when you're done, you're going to be going out and you're going to be sponsoring other people. And the way that we sponsor other people is we take them through this book and we do the actions just like we're going to do in Code Blue. We highlight the stuff just like we're going to do in Code Blue, and we write little notes, and we take the steps and the prayers just like we're going to do in Code Blue. Now, one other thing that's very important for everybody to know, right? If it's not in the book, then it's just my opinion, right? And you can take it or leave it. Now, I hear many people at AA meetings say, take what you want and leave the rest. Now, if you're talking about the actions in the book and the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, I do not recommend that, right? Because you might end up dead, as I almost was. But if it's not in the book and it's my opinion, then you can certainly correct me. You can say, where did you get that information? And you can just plain old ignore it altogether, because, again, we're going to go straight to the book. And hopefully, guys, throughout this session, being sober only 5 years as I am, hopefully I'm going to stick to the book, and I'm not going to inflict my personal opinions on anybody, right? Because I don't think I know enough to do that. So let's go to the table of contents next. Okay, so what we're going to do, table of contents, we're going to put a bracket right next to preface, forward to the first, forward to the second, forward to the third, forward to the fourth edition. Put a little bracket and write brief history. Brief history. Okay. Next, we're going to go to the doctor's opinion, and after the doctor's opinion, we're going to write brief history / step 1. Brief history / step 1. And again, I'm probably going to be going a little bit faster than I normally do. Number 1, Bill's story. After that, write step 1. 2, there is a solution. After that, write step 1. 3, more about alcoholism. Write step 2. We agnostics. Write step 2. How it works. We're going to write 3 and 4. Into action. We're going to write 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11. working with others. Step 12, to wives, the family afterward, to employers, and a vision for you. We're going to write practicing these principles in all our affairs. Again, we're going to bracket all of those. We're going to write practicing these principles in all our affairs. And then we're going to write something in addition underneath a vision to you. Underneath a vision to you, we're going to write building a fellowship up around you. Building a fellowship up around you. So those are kind of the chapters that we're going to cover. So, okay, guys, let's go to the preface, which is XI. XI. Now, at the top of the page, I want you to write something, if you would. I want you to write, meetings are for fellowship. Meetings are for fellowship. The program of AA is for recovery. Program is for recovery. So meetings are for fellowship. Program is for recovery. And what we're going to do here in Code Blue is we're going to do the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, and we're going to do it hopefully as it was originally written by the first 100 people who recovered. And the book's primary author is Bill Wilson, but he had to submit these pages as he finished them to groups in Akron and New York, and they had to read them, make suggestions. They forced changes on him, and when all is said and done, this book was written by the first 100 men and women who recovered, right? Now, I know the first time I tried to read it, and several times after that, I would argue with everything I read because I was a very closed-minded individual, and I had already made up my mind that it wouldn't work. Now, that's one reason I like that set-aside prayer, to try to open up our mind. And and you got to remember that when you're reading this book, and if you're anything like me and you argue against what they say, you're arguing against 100 people, not against one person, because this was written by 100 people. So, page XI. This is the fourth edition of the book Alcoholics Anonymous. The first edition appeared in April 1939, and in the following 16 years, more than 300,000 copies went into circulation. The second edition, published in 1955, reached a total of more than 150,500 copies. The third edition, which came off press in 1976, achieved a circulation of approximately 19,550,000 in all formats. Because this book has become, we're going to highlight and circle the basic text for our society, so highlight that. And off to the right, I want you to write textbook to be studied, right? Textbook to be studied. Okay, and then off to the left, where it says society, I want you to circle the word society. And for now, guys, after you can write group can be a higher power. That's enough to get us started. The group can be a higher power to get us started, right? Because this book has become the basic text for our society and has helped such large numbers of alcoholic men and women to recovery, there exists strong sentiment against any radical changes being made in it. Highlight the next 3 lines. Therefore, the first portion of this volume describing the AA recovery program has been left largely untouched in the course of the revisions made for the second, third, and fourth editions. So next to those 3 lines that we highlighted off to the right, we're going to write first 164 pages. First 164 pages. The section called The Doctor's Opinion has been kept intact, just as it was originally written in 1939 by the late Dr. William D. Silkworth. Now let's underline or highlight Dr. William D. Silkworth, and then right next to his name on the right, we're going to write neurologist. Neurologist treated over 50,000 alcoholics. He was a neurologist who treated over 50,000 alcoholics. by the late William D. Silkworth, our society's great medical benefactor. The second edition added the appendices, the 12 traditions, and the directions for getting in touch with AA. But the chief change was in the section of personal stories, which was expanded to reflect the fellowship's growth. Bill's story, Dr. Bob's nightmare, and one other personal history from the first edition were retained intact. 3 were edited, and one of these was retitled. New versions of 2 stories were written with new titles. 30 completely new stories were added, and the story section was divided into 3 parts under the same headings that are used now. In the 3rd edition, Part 1, Pioneers of AA, was left unchanged. 9 of the stories in Part 2, They Stopped in Time, were carried over from the 2nd edition. 8 new stories were added, and in Part 3, They Lost Nearly All. 8 stories were retained, 5 new ones were added. This 4th edition includes the 12 concepts for world service and revises the 3 sections of personal stories as follows. 1 new story has been added to Part 1, and 2 that originally appeared in Part 3 have been repositioned there. 6 stories have been deleted. 6 of the stories in Part 2 have been carried over. 11 new ones have been added and 11 taken out. Part 3 now includes 12 new stories. 8 were removed in addition to the 2 that were transferred to Part 1. Now, these stories, guys, when they change them, I mean, obviously that's to reflect the nature of the fellowship as it has changed over the years, right? And when they tell the stories, right, and when you're telling your story, because we hope that everybody that goes through these steps will at some point be sharing their story, if not at an AA meeting, certainly with a suffering alcoholic who you're trying to help. And what we do is we try to give our experience, strength, and hope, right? That's what the stories are, and that's what we do when we tell our stories. So we're going to highlight the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines. All changes made over the years in the Big Book, AA members' fond nickname for this volume, have had the same purpose: to represent the current membership of Alcoholics Anonymous more accurately, and thereby to reach more alcoholics. Okay, so we highlighted that. I want you not only to have it highlighted, but also to underline thereby to reach more alcoholics. And right next to that, guys, I want you to write primary purpose. Right? Our primary purpose is to carry the message to the still suffering alcoholic. Right? And hopefully that's what we're doing here at this Code Blue session, whether you're listening to it online or whether you're taking it in person. If you have a drinking problem, we hope that you may pause in reading one of the 42 personal stories and think, yes, that happened to me, or more important, yes, I felt like that, or most important, yes, I believe this program can work for me too. Okay, so now at the bottom of the page, we're going to write 1, 2, 3, which is the program in a nutshell. So 1, trust God. 2, clean house. 3, help others. Right? So trust God, clean house, help others. Okay. So now we're going to move on to the foreword to the first edition. Now, guys, one thing that's really important to remember, Bill's writing, right, this whole book, what he likes to do is he likes to lay out the problem, then he likes to give us the solution, and then he gives us a practical program of action to get that solution. And funny enough, guys, there's an article in the paper that I got out the other day, and it's about a business, right? The business, and it's about how they keep up to date and how they do things and take care of issues, right? So it says the first thing when there's something going on, say sales are going way down and people are quitting, there's a problem in the business. So the first thing that any business does, right, is they identify the problem. That's what the article says, identify the problem, right? And then it says, believe it or not, this step is often overlooked. Well, that's what we're going to do. We're going to identify the problem, okay? The next thing that it says to do, right, it says come up with a list of solutions, right? But then it says trim it down to one solution, right? So we're going to see that in AA, there is a solution, right? We're going to see that, but it says come up to just figure out what one solution, right? And then the next thing it says is take action. And that's exactly what Bill does in his writing. He tells us about the problem, he tells us about the solution, and then he tells us about the practical program of action that is going to be able to implement that solution, right? And those are the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. So let's go to page XIII, Roman numeral 13. Forward to the first edition. This is the foreword as it appeared in the first printing of the first edition in 1939. We. Okay, I want you to circle and highlight that word we. Right? I don't know about you guys, but those last 5-10 years of my drinking, it was me, myself, and I. And I mean, I was completely alone. At least I felt that way. So now we have we. We of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women. Okay, so off to the right, we're going to write 97 men, 3 women. We're going to write 60 Akron, 40 NYC, 40 New York City. 97 men and 3 women. 60 Akron, 40 New York City. And then we're going to highlight the next 1, 2, 3, 4 lines. Who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body to show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this book. So you can stop highlighting there. Now I want you to go back and I want you to recircle the word precisely, and then I want you to circle the word recovered. Okay. Now off to the left, I want you to write never cured. Never cured. But by golly, my book is telling me that I can recover from this seemingly hopeless condition of body and mind. When I came into these rooms, guys, I was miserable, desperate, afraid, alone. I couldn't stop drinking. I was suicidal. I was in ill health. And by golly, I have recovered from that condition, right? Today, I have a certain amount of happiness, a certain amount of serenity, a certain amount of peace of mind, and I want to help other people, right? So I'm going to say that I have recovered from my hopeless condition, right? My hopeless condition was drinking and suicide. Now again, it's important that we understand that we're never cured, and there are things that we have to continually do to stay recovered, but we can indeed recover from this disease. For them, we hope these pages will prove so convincing that no further authentication, okay, circle authentication, will be necessary. That means authentication means valid proof. We think this account of our experiences will help everyone to better understand the alcoholic. Many do not comprehend that the alcoholic, okay, underline to the bottom of to the end of the paragraph, that the alcoholic is a very sick person. And besides, we are sure that our way of living has its advantages for all, right? The alcoholic is very sick, and as a result of our illness, we tend to affect everybody around us, the people in our family, the people we work with, our neighbors. I mean, goodness sakes, we bring everybody down with us, right? And when we recover, right, things get better for not only us, but for everybody in our lives. It is important that we remain anonymous because we are too few at present to handle the overwhelming number of personal appeals which may result from this publication. Being mostly business or professional folk, we could not well carry on our occupations in such an event. We would like it understood that our alcoholic work is an avocation. So underline that our alcoholic work is an avocation, and right after avocation you can write volunteering or free time, right? Volunteering or free time. When writing or speaking publicly about alcoholism, we urge each of our fellowship highlight to omit his personal name, designating himself instead as a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. Stop highlighting there. Now after Alcoholics Anonymous, you can write no last name outside of club, right? But believe you me, if I'm at an AA club, right, like the one where I do these Code Blue sessions, I want everybody to have my full name and my phone number, because if they need to get a hold of me, if they are in trouble, if they're hurting, if they need somebody to talk to, I want them to be able to find me. So no last name outside of club. Very earnestly, we ask the press also to observe this request, for otherwise we shall be greatly handicapped. We are not an organization in the conventional sense of the word. There are no dues or there are no fees or dues whatsoever. Put a 7 above that tradition. The only requirement for membership is an honest, circle the word honest, desire to stop drinking, put a 3 above that. Now, funny, today the tradition has changed. They took out the word honest. So it now says the only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. Some of the members, because they say, you know what, man, I don't honestly know if I have a sincere desire to stop drinking, right? So they took that out. We are not allied with any particular faith, sect, or denomination. Put a 10 above that. Nor do we oppose anyone. We simply wish to be helpful to those who are afflicted. Highlight the next 3 lines. We shall be interested to hear from those who are getting results from this book, particularly from those who have commenced work, circle the word work, with other alcoholics. We should like to be helpful to such cases. Inquiry by scientific, medical, and religious societies will be welcomed. Bear with me, I'm out on the back porch and my papers are just flying all over the place. Okay, so now we're going to write something underneath Alcoholics Anonymous. We're going to write must work with others, right? And my, when I first went through Code Blue, I was too afraid, maybe too prideful, but I couldn't ask anybody to sponsor me. So I snuck into this session. This was my Hail Mary pass to try to recover, because I'd been sober for 6 months. I'd been going to a meeting every single night, right? My routine was get up in the morning, go to the gym at 5:30, work out, come back, eat breakfast, say my prayers, go to work all day. At the end of work, I would go to a meeting. After that meeting, I would race straight home, and I'd watch the news, and I'd go to bed. And I did that 7 days a week. And I got to tell you guys, at the end of the first 6 months, I was stark, raving sober. I was restless, irritable, discontent. I couldn't control my emotional nature. I thought I was going to get fired at work because I was blowing up at people, and I was sober, and I wanted to drink every day, and my life was awful. And but my first sponsor, when I finally did get assigned a sponsor, the people at Code Blue had to assign one to me. He hammered it home into me that I had to work with others, and he had me write this right under Alcoholics Anonymous: must work with others. Now, in something else we're going to write in that blank space as well. In 6 months, Bill got no one sober till he met Dr. Bob. So we're going to read Bill's story. That's in the next, that's 2 sessions forward. And we're going to see that Bill worked with people for 6 months. He tried to work with people in New York, and nobody got it, right, until he went to Akron and met Dr. Bob. But the funny thing is, by Bill trying to help other people, Bill himself was able to stay sober, which was an absolute miracle. Okay, so let's see here. We're going to go to XV, forward to the 2nd edition. Figures given in this forward describe the fellowship as it was in 1955. Since the original foreword to this book was written in 1939, a wholesale miracle has taken place. Our earliest printing voiced the hope that every alcoholic who journeys will find the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous at his destination. Already, continues the early text, 2s and 3s and 5s of us have sprung up in other communities. And I'm sorry, my sponsor also had me write difference between cured and recovered. He wanted to make sure that I understood that, right? There is a difference between being cured. If you're cured from something, you never ever have to do anything ever again, right? We're recovered. We're recovered from a hopeless condition of body and mind, but there are things that we've got to do on a daily basis to stay recovered, right? So he never wanted me to think that I was cured, right? There's a big difference. So I wrote difference between cured and recovered somewhere on that page forward to the 2nd edition. 16 years have elapsed between our first printing of this book and the presentation in 1955 of our 2nd edition. In that brief space, Alcoholics Anonymous has mushroomed into nearly 6,000 groups whose membership is far above 150,000 recovered. Circle that word recovered again, right?
and then draw a little arrow to the margin and write, they have done the work, right? They have done the work, right? And that's where that difference between cured and recovered comes from. They have done the work. Recovered alcoholics. Groups are to be found in each of the United States and all of the provinces of Canada. AA has flourishing communities in the British Isles, the Scandinavian countries, South Africa, South America, Mexico, Alaska, Australia, and Hawaii. All told, promising beginnings have been made in some 50 foreign countries and U.S. possessions. Some are just now taking shape in Asia. Many of our friends encourage us by saying that this is but a beginning. Only the augury, okay, so augury means omen, foretelling, or prediction. Only the augury of a much larger future ahead. That spark that was to flare into the first AA group was struck at Akron, Ohio in June 1935 during a talk between a New York stockbroker, highlight to the end of the page by the way, between a New York stockbroker and an Akron physician. 6 months earlier, the broker had been relieved of his drink obsession by a sudden spiritual, don't turn the page, so at the bottom of the page we're going to write Bill Wilson and Dr. Bob Smith. Obviously, Bill Wilson was the New York stockbroker, and Dr. Bob Smith was the Akron physician. By a sudden spiritual experience, keep highlighting, following a meeting with an alcoholic friend who had been in contact with the Oxford groups of that day. You can stop highlighting. He had also been greatly helped. Oh, by the way, off to the left, we're going to write Abby Thatcher. Abby Thatcher was the friend who had been in contact with the Oxford groups of that day. And incidentally, Abby Thatcher went to Bill. I think Abby was sober maybe 2 months when he thought about his friend Bill, and he said, that guy is still drinking, probably dying. So anybody that tells you you've got to have a year, 2 years until you can go out and sponsor and help other people, don't believe him for a second. Abby Thatcher went to Bill Wilson with about 2 months sobriety. And by the way, when he met Bill in his kitchen, Bill was drunk, and we're gonna see a little bit more about that when we read Bill's story in a couple of weeks. He had also been greatly helped by the late Dr. William D. Silkworth, a New York specialist in alcoholism who is now accounted no less than a medical saint by AA members and whose story of the early days of our society appears in the next pages. Highlight the next sentence. From this doctor, the broker had learned the grave nature of alcoholism. Highlight that sentence and then underline the grave nature of alcoholism. And next to that phrase, I want you to write medical diagnosis. Right? So for the first time ever, we're getting an actual medical diagnosis, and we're gonna look at that next week in the doctor's opinion. Though he could not accept all the tenets of the Oxford groups, he was convinced of the need for moral inventory. Highlight and above it write step 4. Confession of personality defects, highlight, and above it write step 5. Restitution to those harmed, highlight, above it write step 9. Helpfulness to others, highlight, above that write step 12. And the necessity of belief in and dependence upon God, highlight, and after that write 2, 3, and 11. And also 6 and 7. Prior to his journey to Akron, highlight the next 4 lines. The broker had worked hard with many alcoholics on the theory that only an alcoholic could help an alcoholic, but he had succeeded only in keeping sober himself. Stop highlighting there, and off to the left, I want you guys to write something. If you help other alcoholics, you will stay sober. If you help other alcoholics, you will stay sober. Now, incidentally, my hope is, if I ever do get this darn thing posted on YouTube, because I don't know how to work computers too well, but if I do, my hope is that when people sit down and listen to this tape with their book and their highlighters and their pens, that there's going to be more than just one person. I would hope that maybe get in 2s and 3s and 4s, or maybe groups, because there's more power. The more people that are sitting down saying the set-aside prayer and going through this book together, the more people, the more power, I think, and the greater effect it's gonna have. But I guess I'd rather have people do this by themselves than not do it all at all. Again, me, I snuck into the back of the room right when Code Blue started, and I would sneak out right when it left, because because I didn't want anybody to see me in. I didn't want anybody to think that I needed help. I was I was quite a character. The broker had gone to Akron on a business venture which had collapsed, leaving him greatly in fear that he might start drinking again. Highlight the next sentence. He suddenly realized that in order to save himself, he must, circle the word must, guys, because we're going to circle the musts in this book. My sponsor, when I finally got one, I should say when one was finally assigned, made me circle all of the musts, and if it said must, he made me do it. And I do that now with my sponsor, with my sponsees as well. He suddenly realized that in order to save himself, he must, circle must, carry his message to another alcoholic. That alcoholic turned out to be the Akron physician. So again, you can write Dr. Bob Smith. Now, it won't keep you sober, but it was the company, the business venture in Akron was the National Rubber Machine Company. National Rubber Machine Company. Won't keep you sober, but it's an interesting bit of history. The physician had repeatedly tried spiritual means to resolve his alcoholic dilemma, but had failed. But when the broker gave him Dr. Silkworth's description of alcoholism and its hopelessness, the physician began to pursue, underline, the spiritual remedy for his malady, underline malady, with a willingness, underline willingness, he had never before been able to muster. He sobered never to drink again up to the moment of his death in 1950. This seemed to prove that one alcoholic could affect another as no alcoholic could. Now, at the bottom of the page, let's write June 10th of 35. That's Dr. Bob's sobriety date, June 10th, 1935. And then I want you to write 12 stepping in 10 days. Dr. Bob went out to help someone else within 10 days. Right, of his sober date. So again, I think it's very important aspect to this program that we pass along what we've got. And I think everybody, even with a day, even 2 days, can go out and try to help other people. And when we do that, we gain strength. Highlight the next 3 lines. It also indicated that strenuous work, underline strenuous work, one alcoholic with another was vital, underline vital, to permanent recovery, underline permanent recovery. So after the word recovery, guys, I want you to write life and death deal. This is a life and death deal, what we got here. And then I want you to write no half measures. No half measures. Right? Now, when I used to go to meetings and I used to share on steps, right? And my sponsor, when he found out, you haven't done that step yet, he said, when you share on a step, you let everybody know it's your opinion as you have not yet done the step, right? He said, but even more so, you can tell them how you're doing, and what's going on. But if you haven't done the step, he thought it might be a good idea that I don't try to tell people that I had done the step, right, or that I knew what I was talking about. So in my early recovery, when I hadn't done anything and I shared about a step, I had to let them know that it was my opinion, right, as I hadn't done the step yet. Hence the 2 men set to work, highlight, almost frantically upon alcoholics arriving in the ward of the Akron City Hospital. Stop highlighting there. Their very first case, a desperate one, recovered immediately and became AA number 3. Underline AA number 3 and write Bill Dotson. Bill Dotson. He's that guy, when you see the picture of the 2 guys and the man on the bed, that's Bill Dotson. The picture's called Man on the Bed. Bill Dotson was a lawyer. His sober date, you can write down, was June 20th, 1935, AA number 3. He never had another drink. This work at Akron continued through the summer of 1935. There were many failures, but there was an occasional heartening success. When the broker returned to New York in the fall of 1935, underline, the first AA group had actually been formed. Underline that and let's write King School Group. King School Group was the name of it, though no one realized it at the time. Okay? So just a little bit about Bill Wilson. Again, he always tells us in his writings what the problem is, what the solution is, what the practical program of action to get that solution is. So in the summer of '33, Bill is in Towns Hospital, and Silkworth removed him from alcohol. And Silkworth told him, he said, "Bill, your drinking is not due to poor mental character. It's not due to weak willpower, nor is it sinful, right?" And Bill, I mean, that's what everybody'd been telling Bill. He said, Silkworth said, "You have developed a physical allergy to alcohol. You put it in your body, and you trigger the phenomenon called craving. And once you put any alcohol in your body whatsoever, it's impossible for you to stop." Right? So Silkworth told him, "You can never safely drink alcohol again." Right? Now he went on to explain to Bill, he said, "And when you're sober, the obsession of the mind takes over, and it does not matter how badly you want to stop drinking. From time to time, Bill," he told him, "your obsession of the mind will overcome all ideas to the contrary and tell you that it's okay to drink." Right? And once you take that drink, it starts the craving process, and you get drunk all over again. So Silkworth told Bill, he said, "Because of your body, you can't drink, and because of your mind, you can't stay sober." He said, "Dear Lord, Bill, you're absolutely powerless over alcohol." Right? And doctors, ministers, psychiatrists, right? All of these people, trying to help Bill, trying to help us alcoholics, right, are unable, right, because that's human power. Now, funny enough, when Ebby Thatcher, the guy that had been sober for 2 months through the help of the Oxford group, when he went and met Bill, he told Bill, he said, "Bill, you need a power greater than human power," right? And he told Bill, he said, "These Oxford groupers have given me a practical program of action, and that they tell me if I do these actions, they guarantee that we're going to find that power by which we can stay sober," right? So let's go back to the book here. A second small group promptly took shape at New York, to be followed in 1937 with the start of a third at Cleveland. Okay, and Cleveland, that's where the Code Blue method was taught, at Cleveland. Besides these, there were scattered alcoholics who had picked up the basic ideas in Akron or New York, who were trying to form groups in other cities. By late 1937, the number of members having substantial sobriety, so underline substantial sobriety, right? And off to the right, we can write 2.5 years sobriety, because that was substantial. As a matter of fact, that was unheard of, right? That's considered substantial sobriety back then. But was sufficient to convince the membership that a new light had entered the dark world of the alcoholic. Right? This is the first time that anybody's seen, groups of chronic alcoholics getting years of sobriety. It was now time, the struggling groups thought, to place their message and unique experience before the world. This determination bore fruit in the spring of 1939 by the publication of this volume. Okay, so I believe it was in late 1937 in Akron. About 18 people got together, and they had, I think, what you could call the first group conscience. And they said that even as we speak, our message, Alcoholics Anonymous message, is becoming garbled when it's going from mouth to mouth orally. They said, we've got to get this thing down on paper in its pure form so that it's going to be around for posterity, right? And these members made a decision to write a book. Now, this was in the midst of the Depression. They also made a decision that they were going to build a string of hospitals across the country where alcoholics could go and get detoxed, and they were going to hire a string of missionaries to go out across the country and to try to help people get sober. So that bore fruit in 1937. Luckily, the book didn't make enough money for those people to get the string of hospitals started and to hire the missionaries, right? The book sold very, very poorly at the beginning, and AA didn't have enough money to do anything. And as it turns out, that was a very good thing. It was now time the struggling groups thought to place their message and unique experience before the world. This determination bore fruit in the spring of 1939. By the publication of this volume, the membership had then reached about 100 men and women. The fledgling society, which had been nameless, now began to be called Alcoholics Anonymous from the title of its own book. The flying blind period ended, and AA entered a new phase of its pioneering time. With the appearance of the new book, a great deal began to happen. Oh, by the way, some other names that they had for the book that they tried out. One of them was called The Way Out, but as it turns out, there were several other books called The Way Out. Another one they called was Comes the Dawn. Another name they toyed with was 100 Men, but then a woman joined and they couldn't call it 100 Men and a Woman. They toyed with the idea of the Bill W. Movement. I should say Bill toyed with that, but they shot that down right away. And eventually they came up with the name Alcoholics Anonymous. With the appearance of the new book, a great deal began to happen. Dr. Harry Emerson Fosdick, noted clergyman, reviewed it with approval. In the fall of 1939, Fulton Oursler, then editor of Liberty, printed a piece in his magazine called Alcoholics and God. This brought a rush of 800 frantic inquiries into the little New York office, which meanwhile had been established. Each inquiry was painstakingly answered. Pamphlets and books were sent out. Businessmen traveling out of existing groups were referred to these prospective newcomers. New groups started up, and it was found to the astonishment of everyone that AA's message could be transmitted in the mail as well as by word of mouth. By the end of 1939, it was estimated that 800 alcoholics were on their way to recovery. So you can write that it's 4 years old at that point. Now, funny enough, when Bill made it down to Akron, and so when Bill went to Akron on that business venture, incidentally, the business venture came off badly, and he was in the Mayflower Hotel, and he had about $10 in his pocket, and he was walking back and forth. Everybody had left town, and he was there on his own. And on one side was a bar with, the tinkling of ice and glasses, gay music, smoke. And Bill is thinking, boy, those are my kind of people in there. And on the other side of the hall was a directory and a phone booth. And, Bill thought to himself, you know what, man, I'm going to go in there. I'm going to go into the bar, and I'm going to scrape up an acquaintance and see if I can't get a little traveling money. And all of a sudden, Bill had the idea. He said, if I go in there, I'm going to get drunk. If I get drunk, this is all for naught. Everything will be lost. So what Bill did is he walked to the other side of the hall, and he started calling ministers, because he remembered that when he was in New York and he tried to help other people, that he had stayed sober himself. And he knew he was in real danger of getting drunk. So he went to that phone and he started calling everybody. And when he got to the 10th guy referred him to another lady called Henrietta Seiberling. And he called up Henrietta Seiberling and he said, look here, I'm a guy from New York who has a possible cure for alcoholism, and I need to work with another alcoholic. Now, funny enough, this woman was not surprised to get his call, because they had all been praying for Dr. Bob Smith to get better, and Henrietta Seiberling just thought that Bill calling was an answer to her prayer, right? So this was not surprising that she received that call at all. And he said, I've got just the person for you, and you can come out and meet him. And this was the day before Mother's Day, and she got a hold of Dr. Bob, but Dr. Bob's wife, Ann Smith, said, it's Mother's Day, and he brought me a potted plant, and he's drunk under the table right now, so we can't make it. However, tomorrow we're gonna show up. And so Henrietta Seiberling said, come on out here tomorrow, and you're going to meet with a fella called Dr. Bob. So the next morning, Dr. Bob was all hung over, and of course he said, I'm not going to go. There's no way I'm going to go out there and talk to this guy. You're crazy. And they argued back and forth, and finally he agreed to go and listen to this fella for 15 minutes. Well, Dr. Bob and Bill went into a room, and they talked for hours, right? Bob was afraid that Bill was going to talk about his drinking and what was wrong with him, but Bill didn't do that. Bill talked about Bill's drinking, right? And from that point on, Bill discovered the importance of one alcoholic sharing their story, and that the idea that this is a program of identification, right? And, you know, we got to remember that Bill didn't go there to save Dr. Bob. Bill went there to save Bill, because Bill knew that he was going to get drunk unless he went somewhere and tried and found another alcoholic that he could help, right? So, you know, it's kind of funny. Everybody thinks Bill went there to save Dr. Bob, but no, Bill went there to save Bill. The only problem with doing this Code Blue session by myself is when I get off on my tangents, I never know where I left off in the book. Usually there's somebody that can reach over and point. With the appearance of the new book, a great deal began to happen. Dr. Harry Emerson Fosdick, the noted clergyman, reviewed it with approval. Oh, I'm sorry, I already read that. The wind blew my paper over here. There I am. In the spring of 1940, John D. Rockefeller Jr. gave a dinner for many of his friends, to which he invited AA members to tell their stories. News of this got on the world wires. Inquiries poured in again, and many people went to the bookstores to get the book Alcoholics Anonymous. By March 1941, the membership had shot up to 2,000. Highlight the next 4 lines. Then Jack Alexander wrote a feature article in the Saturday Evening Post and placed such a compelling picture of AA before the general public that alcoholics in need of help really deluged us, right? So you guys can go ahead and you can look up the 2 articles. You can look up the one in Liberty Magazine, and you can look up the Jack Alexander article from the Saturday Evening Post. By the close of 1941, AA numbered 8,000 members. The mushrooming process was in full swing. AA had become a national institution. Incidentally, the first Minnesotan, I believe, during the Armistice Day blizzard on November 12th, 11th and 12th, 1940, a couple of AA members got trapped in Minneapolis, and they 12-stepped a fellow by the name of Pat Cronin. And Pat Cronin started a place called 2218 First Avenue, right, which is the longest continuously operating AA club in the world, right? I think it's been going since maybe 1941 or thereabouts, non-stop. So it's the longest continuously operating AA club in the world, and it's a national treasure in AA. And if you ever are in Minneapolis or ever have a chance, you've got to go to 2218 First Avenue South in Minneapolis. It's a wonderful old mansion. There's AA meetings around the clock, 7 days a week there. Our society, now notice that's capitalized, so we're going to underline it, and next to it we're going to write capitalized deity, right? Bill uses a lot of different words for God, right, or as a deity, and he capitalizes them. Our society then entered a fearsome and exciting adolescent period. The test that it faced was this: could these large numbers of erstwhile erratic alcoholics successfully meet and work together? Would there be quarrels over membership, leadership, and money? Would there be strivings for power and prestige? By the way, at that, they asked John D. Rockefeller for money because they were really hurting. Dr. Bob's house was about to be taken over by the mortgage company. Bill was getting put out into the street, and they asked Rockefeller for money, and John D. Rockefeller, he told him, he said, look here, fellas, if I give you money, John D. Rockefeller Jr., if I give you money, it's going to ruin this whole thing. So what John D. did is he put just a little bit of money so Dr. Bob and Bill would actually have enough so that they wouldn't be out into the street. But he declined to give them a lot of money so they could put out a bunch of books and start all these hospitals and things of that nature. So it was very far-sighted on the part of John D. Rockefeller Jr. Would there be strivings for power and prestige? Would there be schisms which would split AA apart? Soon AA was beset by these very problems on every side and in every group. But out of this frightening and at first disrupting experience, the conviction grew that AAs had to hang together or die separately. We had to unify our fellowship or pass off the scene, right? So after that, we're going to write the traditions, right? And comedically, people sometimes say the steps keep us from suicide, and the traditions keep us from homicide. As we discovered the principles, underline the word principles, as we discovered the principles by which the individual alcoholic could live, so we had to evolve principles by which the AA groups and AA as a whole could survive and function effectively. It was thought that no alcoholic man or woman could be excluded from our society, that our leaders might serve but never govern, that each group was to be autonomous, and that there was to be no professional class of therapy. There were to be no fees or dues. Our expenses were to be met by our own voluntary contributions. There was to be the least possible organization, even in our service centers. Our public relations were to be based upon attraction rather than promotion. It was decided that all members ought to be anonymous at the level of press, radio, TV, and films. And in no circumstances should we give endorsements, make alliances, or enter into public controversies. Right, so two things real quick, and you can look them up. There was a group called the Washingtonians, one alcoholic helping another. They had great success in the mid-1840s, but they got into politics and religion. They tried to stop the sale of booze, and they failed, right? Once they got into those things, they failed. The Oxford group got into controversies, and the Oxford group ultimately failed too. So boy, are we ever lucky that our founders had the foresight to give us these traditions where we do one thing and one thing only, and that's to carry the message to the still suffering alcoholic. This was the substance of AA's 12 traditions, which are stated in full on page 561 of this book. Highlight that because we want to be able to go to them when we need to. Though none of these principles had the force of rules or laws, they had become so widely accepted, accepted by 1950 that they were confirmed by our first international conference held at Cleveland. I underline that a little bit. Today, the remarkable unity of AA is one of the greatest assets that our society has. While the internal difficulties of our adolescent period were being ironed out, public acceptance of AA grew by leaps and bounds. For this, there were two principal reasons. Put a big one in front of this. One, the large numbers of recoveries, right? Put a two in front of the and reunited homes, right? Two principal reasons, large numbers of people recovering and homes that are put back together. Now we're going to highlight the next 5 lines. These made their impressions everywhere. Of alcoholics who came to AA and really tried, 50% got sober at once and remained that way. 25% sobered up after some relapses, and among the remainder, those who stayed on with AA showed improvement. Okay, so next to those lines that we just highlighted, off to the left, we're going to write worked all 12 steps. Okay, they worked all 12 steps. I'm not talking about people that go to 90 meetings in 90 days and sit in the back and don't do anything like I did for years, right? I'm not talking about those people. These are people who go through the book and follow the instructions and do all the actions that the book tells us we've got to do to recover. My goodness, it's telling us that 75% of us got sober that way. Now, I don't know how things are in your groups, but in my groups here, we're lucky if we get 10%. I think we're lucky if we get 5%. So what we're going to try to do in this Code Blue is we're going to try to do what the first 100 did. We're going to try to do what the original AA, the way it was back in the early days, right, where they had those wonderful statistics, 75%, and the other 25% showed vast improvement. Other thousands came to a few AA meetings and at first decided they didn't want the program, but great numbers of these, about 2 out of 3, began to return as time passed. Another reason for the wide acceptance of AA was the ministration of friends in medicine, religion, and the press, together with innumerable others who became our able and persistent advocates. Without such support, AA could have made only the slowest progress. Some of the recommendations of AA's early medical and religious friends will be found further on in this book. Alcoholics Anonymous is not a religious organization. We are not a religious organization. Neither does AA take any particular medical point of view. Underline, though we cooperate widely with the men of medicine as well as with the men of religion, right? I was taught by working these steps and by my sponsor that I've got to keep an open mind, right? Got to keep an open mind. Maybe these other people are going to have some things that are going to be helpful to me and to those that I know. Alcohol being no respecter of persons, we are an accurate cross-section of America, and in distant lands the same democratic evening up process is now going on. By personal religious affiliation, we include Catholics, Protestants, Jews, Hindus, and a sprinkling of Muslims and Buddhists. More than 15% of us are women. At present, our membership is pyramiding at the rate of about 20% a year. So far, upon the total problem of several million actual and potential alcoholics in the world, we have made only a scratch. In all probability, we shall never be able to touch more than a fair fraction of the alcohol problem and all its ramifications. Upon therapy for the alcoholic himself, we surely have no monopoly. Yet it is our great hope that all those who have as yet found no answer, underline, may begin to find one in the pages of this book and will pleasantly join us on the high road to a new freedom. Now we're going to write some things here in that open spot. So let's write the words cake mix theory, okay? Underneath that, we're going to write basic text equals sobriety and good life. Cake mix theory, basic text equals sobriety and good life. And what they're referring to like if you go to an AA party and you have a slice of a cake and you say, my God, that's the best cake I've ever had, and you go to the person that made that cake and you say, may I get the recipe for that cake? Right? And the person being a nice AA member is going to say sure, and they write out that recipe. Now, if you take that recipe home and you follow the step-by-step instructions, you are going to get that same chocolate cake that's going to taste exactly like the one you like so much at that AA party. Now, and that's what our basic text is. The problem with alcoholics, and certainly with somebody like me, I'm going to take that cake recipe, and instead of putting 3 eggs in, I'm going to say I want it fluffier, and I'm going to put in 4 eggs. Instead of putting in 2 cups of sugar, I'm going to say I got a sweet tooth, I'm going to put in 3 cups of sugar, right? Oh, I'm going to do 2 teaspoons of vanilla, not 1, and I'm going to bake it at 425 instead of 350, and I'm going to bake it for an hour instead of 45 minutes, right? So what I do is I change that around, and what comes out of the oven might look like a cake, but it certainly does not have that same taste of the cake, and it's simply not the same thing, right? So that's why it's so important, and what we're going to do here in Code Blue is we are going to go through this line by line, and we're going to do the actions exactly as they tell us that we've got to do them. And again, we're going to be circling all of these musts. So we're going to write a few more things, guys. We're going to write meetings are for fellowship. Meetings are for fellowship. Steps are for recovery. Steps are for recovery. The program of AA is working steps with people. So once again, meetings are for fellowship. Steps are for recovery. The program of AA is working the steps with people. Whatever you do, don't do what I did. I thought if I went to enough meetings, I could get sober, right? I'd go to the meetings, but I wouldn't do any of these steps. I wouldn't do any of this work. I would have none of that, right? I don't know about this God thing. I thought maybe if I could go to enough meetings that this sobriety thing would rub off on me, and I got to tell you, sometimes I could get a week, sometimes 2, a couple times I got even a month, sometimes even 2 months, but until I buckled down and went through this book with somebody leading me through it and I did the work, I could not get enough peace of mind and serenity and happiness to stay away from the booze. So again, Code Blue, what we're going to do, we're going to go through this book line by line, and when we come to a prayer, we're going to say that prayer. When we come to a step, we're going to do that step. So we're going to write one more thing, guys, at the bottom of the page. We're going to write, do what they did, you get what they got, right? And that's the cake mix theory. You do what they did, you're going to get what they got. Okay, forward to the 3rd edition. We're going to plow through this stuff. By March 1976, when this edition went to the printer, the total worldwide membership of Alcoholics Anonymous was conservatively estimated at more than 1 million, with almost 28,000 groups meeting in over 90 countries. Surveys of groups in the United States and Canada indicate that AA is reaching out not only to more and more people, but to a wider and wider range. Women now make up more than 1/4 of the membership. Among newer members, the proportion is nearly 1/3. 7% of the AA surveyed are less than 30 years of age, among them many in their teens. The basic principles of the AA program, it appears, hold good for individuals with many different lifestyles, just as the program has brought recovery to those of many different nationalities. The 12 steps that summarize the program may be called La Dos Pasos in one country, Les 12 Étapes in another, but they trace exactly the same path to recovery that was blazed, underline that word blazed, by the earliest members of Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, that word blaze, that tells me that I've got to go out and I've got to help other people. When I'm at a meeting and I get a new guy there and he's scared, I'm not going to say, here's my number, call me, right? No, I'm going to take his number and I'm going to call him because I know how it was for me. So we're going to do a little bit of this blazing ourselves, right? In spite of the great increase in the size and span of this fellowship, at its core it remains simple and personal. Highlight to the end of the page. Each day, somewhere in the world, recovery begins when one alcoholic talks with another alcoholic, sharing experience, strength, and hope. Okay, guys. So you know what? When they first this book came out, right? They'd send the book out to California. They'd send the book out to Arkansas. People would read it. They'd do what it said. They'd recover, and they would start a group, right? They would start a group. And back in the early days, the program and the fellowship of AA were one and the same, right? There was no quarrel between them, right? But as many groups started to appear all over the country, slowly, people realized that there was a huge power, and that was when people came together to overcome a similar problem. There was great power in that, right? And the fellowship, right? And then, so what happened is the fellowship started to become different from the program, right? And people found that they were able to stay sober by going to a lot of meetings, right? And so then all of a sudden people are saying, well, you know what, man? I'm not going to give all my will in my life over to the care of God. I'm just going to turn over the alcohol. I'm not going to tell all my story to God and another person. I mean, hell, God knows it all anyway. I don't have to have God help me with all of my defects of character, right? Only the really bad ones, right? And I don't have to make direct amends to everybody I've harmed, right? I don't need to do all that stuff to stay sober. And so all of a sudden, guys, what happens, instead of a life-changing program, we turned into a non-drinking society. And now all of a sudden, people started to measure success not by the quality of the life, but by the number of days, weeks, or months that we've gone without taking a drink, right? I mean, that's so. All of a sudden, people aren't going through with the entire program. They thought it was too drastic, right? Now all of a sudden, the treatment centers come onto the scene, right? And I know the treatment centers are important. Dear Lord, I've been through 9 of them, right? I mean, I walked in near death, and I walked out in much better shape. But all of a sudden, people started showing up in AA, and all of a sudden, they're talking about things we've never heard of before, like chemical dependency, dysfunctional sex, dysfunctional families, meaningful relationships, and the program in the treatment centers is not like the program in the book, right? Now these people, they come into AA, and of course they want to talk about what they were just taught, so they start talking about all these things, and pretty soon, we're not talking about the steps at these AA meetings. Sometimes you go to an AA meeting, and the only way you know it's a meeting is when they read the preamble. So what I hope that we do with Code Blue is, when we go back to our groups, is I hope that we start making these meetings about the steps and recovery from alcoholism the way that it was originally meant to be, right? The way that the book has it. And incidentally, the recovery section of the book has not been changed since it was put out in 1939, and thank God it hasn't been changed, right? Because, alcohol hasn't changed. human nature hasn't changed and alcoholics haven't changed. I mean, we're still getting divorced. We're still dying in car wrecks. We're still ending up in jail, right? And these steps are still saving our lives. So, it is my hope that when we go back to our AA groups, again, we can have them devoted to the practice of the 12 steps and recovery from alcoholism. And as a matter of fact, I've got a little pamphlet here. It's called Problems Other Than Alcohol. This was written by one of our founders, Bill W. And in this pamphlet, Bill says sobriety, freedom from alcohol, through the teaching and practice of the 12 steps is the sole purpose of an AA group. Groups have repeatedly tried other activities and they have always failed, right? So, so once again, I want to make sure that everybody, that they don't do what I did, which was confusing the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous with the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. Because when I went in and out of those rooms for 20 years and I couldn't get sober to save my life, literally, I said AA doesn't work. But, as I discovered about 4.5 years ago, I wasn't giving AA a chance, right? I wasn't giving it a chance. So let's go to page XXIII. Roman numeral 23, almost done. This fourth edition of Alcoholics Anonymous came off press in November 2001 at the start of a new millennium. Since the third edition was published in 1976, worldwide membership of AA has just about doubled to an estimated 2 million or more, with nearly 100,800 groups meeting in approximately 150 countries around the world. Literature has played a major role in AA's growth, and a striking phenomenon of the past quarter century has been the explosion of translations of our basic literature into many languages and dialects. In country after country where the AA seed was planted, it has taken root, slowly at first, then growing by leaps and bounds when literature has become available. Currently, Alcoholics Anonymous has been translated into 43 languages. As the message of recovery has reached larger numbers of people, it has also touched the lives of vastly greater variety of suffering alcoholics. When the phrase, underline, we are people who normally would not mix, just underline that little line there. Page 17 of this book was written in 1939. It referred to a fellowship composed largely of men and a few women with quite similar social, ethnic, and economic backgrounds. Like so much of AA's basic text, those words have proved to be far more visionary than the founding members could ever have imagined. The stories added to this edition represent a membership whose characteristics of age, gender, race, and culture have widened and have deepened to encompass virtually everyone the first 100 members could have hoped to reach. While our literature has preserve the integrity of the AA message, sweeping changes in society as a whole are reflected in new customs and practices within the fellowship. Taking advantage of technological advances, for example, AA members with computers can participate in meetings online, sharing with fellow alcoholics across the country or around the world. In any meeting anywhere, AA share experience, strength, and hope with each other in order to stay sober and help other alcoholics. Modem to modem or face to face, AA speak the language of the heart in all its power and simplicity. Okay, guys, we're going to stop there for the day now. We end every session with the third step prayer. So, hopefully there's more than one of you listening to this. But even if there's just one, let's get on our knees and let's say the third step prayer. That's on page 63. It's middle of the page on page 63, and of course I'm gonna ask you to highlight that whole prayer because that's how we end every session. God, I offer myself to Thee to build with me and to do with me as Thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do Thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help of Thy power, Thy love, and Thy way of life. May I do Thy will always. And you'll notice there's no amen after that, but I always say, may I do Thy will always. Peace. I guess I did forget one more thing. And hopefully, I don't know if I've got the paperwork online yet, but we do have some paperwork that I pass out at Code Blue, and the one of them is a road chart to decision, right? And it's the physical allergy and the mental obsession, and the problem is lack of power. I talked a little bit about that. Due to the physical allergy, I can't stop drinking once I've started, and due to the mental obsession, I can't stay stopped. So if I can't not drink, and if I can't control my drinking once I start drinking, I'm completely powerless. So my problem is lack of power. Right? Now, step 2, we've got the solution, which is power. Right? Now what the solution is going to be, it's going to be what they call a vital spiritual experience. That's what Ebby told Bill, and that's what Bill had in the town's hospital. It's a vital spiritual experience which changes us. Now, the fellowship, hopefully the fellowship is going to support us long enough until we can have that vital spiritual experience and change. So the solution is power, right? Power. Now, we've got to make a decision, right? The decision is the turning point, right? So for years, what I did is I continued, my decision was to disbelieve, and I went off to the left, which was insanity or death, or jail and homelessness, misery, desperation, fear, anger, self-centeredness, all of those things, right? But the other direction that we can go, if we make the decision, that turning point, we can believe and we can accept spiritual help, and then all of a sudden we get sanity and sobriety. So, finally in my life, I went the other way. And step 3, for me, was just a decision that I'm going to do whatever these fellas tell me to do and see if it works. And by golly, I'm quite happy that I finally did that. So I guess that's it for the first session. I'm sure I forgot a lot, but the rest of the sessions will be taking place with the rest of the group. So thank you for listening.